911, what's your emergency?
Thanks for joining us tonight. We'd love to know where you're listening from and who you're sharing this moment with. Drop a comment below. If you enjoy a good scare before bed, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more nightly chills. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and let the story begin. It was the first month of my new job as a cop in Chicago, and I was already starting to question if I was cut out for it. I was young, barely out of the academy, and full of that energy you get when you think you're invincible. At first, it was just what I imagined: catching petty thieves, busting drunk drivers, responding to noise complaints. Most of it was pretty tame, but I didn't mind. I liked the feeling of the badge, the authority that came with it. But there was always something lurking in the back of my mind. A feeling that sooner or later I'd face something I wasn't ready for. I'd heard the stories from the veteran cops, weird things that went beyond normal crime. Strange calls in the middle of the night, places in the city they never wanted to visit. I always thought they were just messing with the rookies, trying to scare us. Then came that night. It was a Friday, just past midnight, and I was on night duty, something I'd quickly come to hate. The city feels different at night. The streets are quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It's like the shadows are alive, stretching out from every corner, waiting for something. Waiting for you to make a mistake. The call came in around 12:30 a.m. over the radio. A disturbance on Archer Avenue. I remember rolling my eyes, thinking it was probably just another drunk couple fighting, or maybe a neighbor blasting music too loud. Archer Avenue was known for trouble, but nothing out of the ordinary. At least, that's what I thought. As I was driving, the radio crackled again. This time, it wasn't just a disturbance. The dispatcher's voice sounded shaky, like she wasn't quite sure how to say what came next. A woman. She's killed her whole family. I almost slammed on the brakes. My partner, Sarah, who was sitting next to me, went pale. We both just looked at each other for a moment, neither of us saying a word. This wasn't some bar fight. This was something else. What made it worse was that the woman's record was clean. Completely spotless. No history of violence, no criminal record, nothing. It didn't make sense. When we pulled up to the house, it felt like the temperature dropped a few degrees. The streetlights cast long shadows over the yard, and the house itself looked dark, like it was sucking in the light around it. Neighbors were gathered outside, whispering to each other, but none of them dared go near the house. They just stood there, watching, as if the place had become cursed. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Sarah was right behind me, her hand hovering near her gun. We both knew this was bad. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on us. "We should wait for backup," she whispered. But I shook my head. "We've got to go in." The front door was ajar, just slightly, like someone had left in a hurry. I pushed it open, and as soon as we stepped inside, it was like we had walked into another world. The air was heavy with a strange metallic smell. Blood. And it was dark. so dark that even the beam of our flashlights seemed weak against the shadows. We started searching the downstairs rooms, moving slowly, checking each corner. Everything seemed normal at first. Family photos on the walls, toys scattered across the living room floor, a half-eaten dinner left on the kitchen table. But there was no sign of the woman or the bodies. That's when we heard it. A sound that I'll never forget for as long as I live. It was soft at first, like something being torn apart. Then it became clearer, a wet, chewing sound, like someone was eating. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Sarah froze, her eyes wide. "It's coming from upstairs," I whispered. She nodded, her face pale as a ghost. We had no choice but to go up there. The stairs creaked under our weight as we made our way up. With each step, the smell of blood got stronger, more suffocating. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the adrenaline surging through me. My flashlight shook slightly in my hand, and I cursed myself for being so scared. When we reached the top of the stairs, the sound was louder. The chewing. The tearing. I swallowed hard and pointed my flashlight down the hallway. At the end of the hall was a single door, slightly ajar. The sound was coming from inside. I don't know why, but everything in me screamed not to open that door. I wanted to turn around to get the hell out of that house and never look back. But we were cops. This was our job. So, with Sarah right behind me, I reached for the door and pushed it open. What I saw, I'll never forget. The room was drenched in blood. It covered the floor, the walls, even the ceiling. And in the middle of the room, crouched over a mangled body, was the woman. The woman who had killed her family. She was eating them. Her hands were covered in blood, chunks of flesh in her mouth, her teeth gnashing away at what was once her husband. She looked up at us, her face twisted into this grotesque, sickening smile. Her eyes were wide, black as night, and there was something wrong with them. Something inhuman. My flashlight beam hit her face, and the moment it did, I felt a wave of nausea. Sarah gasped behind me, her hand over her mouth as she tried not to vomit. "Step outside," I managed to shout, though my voice was shaking. I didn't know what else to say. What else do you say to someone who's eating their own family? But she didn't move. Instead, she stood up slowly, still smiling. And as she rose to her full height, something changed. At first, I couldn't quite understand what I was seeing. Her face, her body, they weren't right. Her features started to shift, like they were melting and reforming into something else. Her eyes, which had been black, grew wider, almost bulging out of her skull. Her skin stretched tight, her mouth twisting into an impossibly wide grin, revealing rows of jagged, sharp teeth. Her height seemed to change too. She grew taller, her limbs lengthening, bones cracking and popping as her body contorted in unnatural ways. We called for backup immediately. A search team scoured the woods for hours. but they never found her. Not a single trace. It was like she had vanished into thin air. But the real horror was what we found inside the house after she was gone. Down in the basement, beneath the floorboards, we uncovered something that still makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. A ritual. Symbols drawn in blood, strange markings that none of us recognized. In the center of it all, there were black candles, burnt down to nothing but stubs and the remains of what looked like bones. Small ones. Animal, maybe, or worse. The neighbors refused to talk about it at first. But after some pressing, we learned that the whole family, the mother, the father, even the kids, had been involved in some sort of dark ritual. No one knew exactly what it was, or why they had started it, but the neighbors had always felt that something was off about them. Whispers of strange chants late at night, shadows moving in the windows when no one was supposed to be home. But no one ever said anything. Not until it was too late. Now, let's move to the next story. I used to patrol a quiet area near the woods in Cedar Hill, Tennessee. It's a small town. Nothing much happens there. Most nights it's just me driving down empty roads, making sure everything's calm. That night, though, I wish I hadn't been working. It was around 2 a.m., and I was cruising down this old road near the forest edge. There aren't many streetlights out there, just one every so often, casting long shadows across the road. That's when I saw her, just standing there in the middle of the street right by the trees. No cars around, nothing. She was just there, looking like she didn't belong. I slowed down and pulled over, thinking maybe she was in trouble. Got out of the car and called out, "Ma'am, you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't answer. Didn't move, either. Her back was to me, and she was just standing so still it didn't feel right. My gut told me something was off, but I walked closer anyway, keeping my flashlight on her. I could see her hair, long and dark, hanging over her shoulders. She wore this old-fashioned dress, like something from another time. I stopped a few feet away, close enough to feel something strange in the air, like it was colder all of a sudden. "Ma'am," I said again, this time louder, but still nothing. I was starting to get real nervous. Then she turned. I swear to God, I'll never forget that moment. Her face, it wasn't right. Her eyes were all wrong. They were black, hollow, like they were looking straight through me. And her mouth, it was twisted into this unnatural smile. But worse than that, her skin, it looked like it was shifting, almost bubbling under the surface, like something was crawling inside her. My heart dropped into my stomach. I reached for my radio, but my hand was shaking. As soon as I tried to call it in, she started walking toward me, slow at first, then faster. Her feet weren't even touching the ground. She was gliding, like she was being pulled forward by something I couldn't see. I backed up quick, stumbling over my words. "Stop! Stay back!" But she didn't stop. Her face kept twisting, changing. 1 second she looked like a normal woman, the next like something else. something worse. Her mouth stretched wider, impossibly wide, and I saw teeth, sharp, jagged teeth, like a monster. I bolted back to my car, fumbling for the door handle, but as soon as I opened it, I heard this low growl behind me. Not a human sound, more like an animal, but deeper. I turned around, and she was gone. Vanished. For a split second, I thought maybe I was losing my mind. But then, something grabbed me from behind, yanked me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, knocking the wind out of me. I scrambled to my knees, looking around, but no one was there. Just the dark street and the woods. But I knew something was watching me. I could feel it. I got to my car, jumped in, and slammed the door shut. The radio crackled, but all I could hear was static. I tried to start the engine, but the car wouldn't turn over. It just clicked. Again and again. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, sitting in the back seat, staring at me through the rearview mirror, that same twisted smile on her face. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't move. I couldn't think. She leaned forward, close enough that I could feel her breath on my neck, cold as ice. Her voice was a whisper, but it echoed inside my head. "You can't leave." I don't know how I did it, but I threw myself out of the car, ran as fast as I could down the road. My flashlight was bouncing in my hand, the beam barely cutting through the dark. But I kept running. I didn't look back. When I finally got back to town, I ran into the station, gasping for air, shaking all over. I tried to explain what happened, but the words wouldn't come out right. They looked at me like I was crazy. I quit the next day. Never went back to Cedar Hill. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I see her. Not fully, just glimpses in the woods, in the trees. Sometimes in my rearview mirror. That same smile, those black eyes, like she's waiting. And I know deep down, one day she'll catch up to me, and I won't be able to run. Hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the story. Your support means the world and keeps these thrilling tales coming. Get ready for the next story that will send chills down your spine. I've been on patrol for years, seen a lot of weird things, but this one still gets under my skin. It was late, around 2 a.m., when dispatch sent me to a call-up in the mountains. The caller had reported seeing several people standing in her yard, holding a baby above their heads, chanting. I laughed at the details, figuring it was just someone imagining things. I had a backup officer with me that night, which I was grateful for later. The drive up was quiet. No cars, no people, just darkness and the sound of my own tires on the mountain road. You don't get many folks wandering around up there that late, especially not by foot. After about 20 minutes, I reached the driveway. It was gated, with woods on both sides, and a small, dimly lit house at the end. The place looked creepy, I won't lie. There was something about it, the way the woods seemed to press in, almost like they were watching me. I knocked on the door, standing on a large patio. That's when I heard it, a rustling noise, like someone moving to my left. I swung my flashlight in that direction, but there was nothing. My heart was racing now, though I told myself it was just some animal. I knocked again, and that's when I clearly heard two voices inside, a man and a woman. I felt better, thinking the noise must have been someone in the house moving around. The door opened, and a woman stood there. She looked terrified, eyes wide, shaking. She barely said a word, just pulled me inside and begged me to close the door. I followed her into the living room, where she had a small security monitor set up, like the kind you use to watch a baby's crib. The camera pointed at the front door, the very patio I had been standing on. I glanced at the screen, and it showed the patio, empty, nothing out of the ordinary. The woman started to explain how she had been sitting there, reading, when she heard something strange over the security feed. But before she could finish, I interrupted. "Where's the man?" I asked, still sure I had heard a male voice when I knocked. She looked confused, swore she was alone. I didn't believe her at first, and I asked her over and over, thinking she was lying. But my partner checked the entire house, and there was no one else there. The woman went on to say that she had seen two figures standing at her front door on the monitor. They were just standing there, staring, until the knocking started. That's when she called the police. As she spoke, the audio on the monitor suddenly went from dead quiet to this loud, rushing noise. We all froze, listening. It sounded like wind, but there wasn't any wind outside. The woman was trembling now. "What is that?" I asked, feeling uneasy. She looked at me with wide eyes and said, "It's them." My partner and I exchanged a glance. He was just as spooked as I was. The woman handed me her phone, saying she had taken pictures of the figures from the monitor. I scrolled through, not expecting much. The first few were too blurry to make anything out. But then I saw it. Two tall, dark figures standing at her door. One of them was holding something above its head. The next picture showed the object closer to the door, like it had been set down. My stomach turned as I realized what it was. A small, bundled shape, too small to be anything but a baby. We had to check outside. We walked the perimeter of the house, flashlights sweeping through the trees. I kept thinking about the noise I heard earlier on the patio, and the male voice I was sure came from inside. My partner stayed silent, but I could tell he was scared too. After circling the house, we found nothing. No sign of anyone. No footprints, nothing out of place. It was like those figures had never been there at all. When we got back inside, the woman was shaking. She said she couldn't stay there any longer. She packed a bag, said she was heading into town to stay at a hotel. As we walked back to our patrol cars, my partner suddenly bolted to his vehicle and took off without a word. I stood there, alone in the dark, surrounded by nothing but the woods and the quiet. I'd never felt so uneasy in my life. I got into my car and left, but that night still haunts me. Those figures, the voices, that strange rushing sound. I know what I saw, what I heard. And no matter how much I try to reason it out, nothing makes sense. Whatever was on that patio that night It wasn't human. And I hope I never come across anything like it again. It was just another routine night at the 911 dispatch center. I'd taken hundreds of calls over the years. Accidents, domestic disputes, the usual stuff. But nothing could have prepared me for the one that came through that night. It still haunts me. The phone rang, and I picked up, my voice tired from hours of work. 911, what's your emergency? There was silence on the other end, but I could hear soft breathing. Hello? I said again, a bit louder this time. A small voice, a kid's voice, finally spoke. My parents went down to the basement. The way he said it, so quietly, sent a shiver down my spine. Something about his tone wasn't right. How long ago did they go down there? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Maybe 10 minutes ago, the kid whispered. But I hear screaming now. I felt a pit form in my stomach. Screaming? Is anyone else in the house with you? No, the kid replied. Just my mom and dad. But the screams, they're not theirs. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to dispatch an officer, but I hesitated. It sounded bizarre, and I thought maybe it was just a prank. All right, kid, screaming from the basement? Are you sure it's not a TV or something? The kid's voice cracked. It's not the TV. I can hear it right now. It sounds like hundreds of people, all screaming at the same time. That's when my heart skipped a beat. I've dealt with prank calls before, but something about the terror in his voice was too real, too raw. Okay, I said, my tone changing. Where are your parents now? They haven't come back, the kid said. They took this old book with them. My dad found it in the attic last week. He said it had something to do with devil worship, but he laughed, thought it was funny. I started typing the address into the system. Stay on the line with me. I'm sending an officer to your house right now, okay? Just stay where you are. Okay, the kid whispered. The line went quiet again except for the faint sound of those screams in the background. It was hard to tell if they were real or just in my head. Officer Peterson responded to the call. He was one of the more seasoned guys on the force, not easily rattled. As soon as I sent him the details, he radioed back. Devil worship? Screaming from a basement? He chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. Probably just some teenagers messing around. Maybe, I muttered, though I didn't believe it. As Peterson pulled up to the house, I stayed on the line with the kid, trying to keep him calm. Are you okay, buddy? There was no answer for a few moments, then a faint, trembling voice. The screaming. It's getting louder. I could hear it too now, even through the phone. It wasn't just a scream. It was hundreds of voices, all overlapping, crying out in agony. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Peterson, do you hear that? I radioed in. Yeah, he replied, his voice suddenly serious. I hear it. I'm going in. He entered the house, and I could hear the crunch of his boots on the gravel, then the creak of the front door. The kid was still on the line, but he had gone completely silent. Peterson, what's going on? I asked, my heart pounding. I'm heading down to the basement now, he said, but there was no more humor in his voice. This place, something feels wrong. The line crackled as Peterson moved through the house. I could hear him breathing heavily, like he was trying to keep it together, and then, as he approached the basement door, The screaming got louder. It wasn't just loud, it was unbearable, like hundreds, maybe thousands of people crying out all at once. "It's coming from down there," Peterson muttered. "I'm going in." I wanted to tell him to wait for backup, but before I could, I heard the door creak open. The screams seemed to rush up from the depths of the basement, like they had been trapped and were now escaping into the air. I could barely hear Peterson over the noise. "Jesus Christ." Peterson's voice cracked over the radio. There's something down here." "What do you see?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but my hands were shaking. There was a long pause before he answered. "It's dark, so dark and cold. There's something moving in the shadows, and the floor, and it's wet, but not with water." "Peterson, get out of there," I said, my voice rising. "Wait for backup." But he didn't listen. He kept moving deeper into the basement. There's an altar, and that book, it's lying open on the ground." I could hear the screams growing louder, more desperate. It was like they were trying to drown out Peterson's voice. And then, in the background, I heard him gasp. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "Peterson, what's going on?" I demanded, but I knew something was terribly wrong. "They're coming," Peterson said, his voice barely audible over the screams. "The ground! It's opening up! Oh God, they're coming!" Who's coming?" And then his voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "The devils. They're coming." Suddenly, the radio went dead. I tried calling Peterson back, but there was nothing, just static. The kid was still on the line, his breathing quick and shallow. "What's happening?" he cried. "I can hear them. They're in the basement. They're coming." I dispatched every available unit to the house, but I knew it was too late. Something evil had been unleashed, something far beyond what any of us could handle. When the backup arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The screaming had stopped, but the damage was done. The officers kicked open the basement door, and what they found down there was impossible. The basement floor had collapsed, leaving a massive, gaping hole in the earth. It looked like the ground had been ripped apart, as if something had crawled its way out. There were claw marks along the walls, and the air was thick with the stench of sulfur and decay. Peterson was gone. His radio was found near the altar, but there was no sign of him, or the kid's parents. They had vanished without a trace. The last thing I heard that night, just before the radio cut out completely, was Peterson's voice. Faint, broken, calling out for help. No one ever saw him again. That house? It's still there, standing silent and abandoned. No one goes near it. They say at night, if you stand close enough, you can still hear the screams.